Good afternoon. We have the graveyard session nearly at the end. Just wanted to give a little bit of an introduction to this session. The organization that I'm involved in has been running a farmers catchment sensitive farming study group here locally in the catchment of the Umgeni and the Umkomas. And we engaged the services of Kevin Kirkman to help us with a whole lot of the vegetation assessments and what have you. And during the time that we spent together, Kevin started to say to me, there's a community of practice here that perhaps needs a stage. So we were starting to think about identifying, defining, and cultivating that community of practice. And that community of practice being the effect of rangelands on catchments and catchment functioning in terms of water quality and quantity and numerous other parameters. So thank you, Kevin. That's what spurred this session coming into effect. And we've started to get a couple of speakers together. And our hope is that this will actually cultivate that community of practice in future conferences and in research. Thank you for the nod. So without further ado, I want to hand over to, there's a little bit of change to the program, forgive me, but we've got Michele and Alistair Clulow who are actually going to co-present on the work that they've done because it overlaps so much. And then Kirsten Oliver's going to give us something, and then Mark Graham, followed by a discussion session, which you won't see in your program, but I suppose that is just a question and answer session. Thank you, Michele.
Afternoon, everyone. I feel a little bit odd standing up here as a hydrologist in this environment. So this work started, I joined SAON a long time ago, but it started while I was at UKZN in 2012. And then I convinced Alistair to get involved with me and Byron and do some work up there on looking at Bracken and Leucocidia on the impacts of water. So we've been working on this since about 2017. Byron wrote up his PhD, and then we've since continued with that. So we've kind of pulled it all together for today. So the grasslands are key for water. Without them, we'd have a major problem in South Africa in terms of water supply. So in these areas, and particularly in the montane grasslands, a higher proportion of the rainfall is converted to runoff than in other areas. So typically over the country, we get about 9% of our rainfall is converted to runoff. In some of these grassland montane areas, we're reaching up to 50% of our rainfall is going into runoff. But it's not only that these are high rainfall areas, so it's the nature of the hydrological cycle in these areas that is creating this. So in terms of water, we took in strategic water source areas. So these are areas that contribute disproportionately more water than other areas. What you'll see here, these are the strategic water source areas, the grassland biome that you all know very well. Most of those strategic water source areas fall within the grassland biome. Barring a few, they are crucial for our water supply. These areas meet all of Gauteng's demands, just about. Okay, our work sits in the Northern Drakensberg Strategic Water Source Area, and at the moment we're in the Southern Drakensberg Strategic Water Source Area. So looking at this, how do we look at the impact of change in grasslands and how that impacts on water resources? So we're very fortunate that we've got the Cathedral Peak research catchments. So I've heard a lot about long-term data sets here. This is our hydrology long-term data set. This data set dates back to the 1940s. So we're very fortunate to be able to have this data to work with. It was set up initially to look at the impacts of commercial afforestation on water. So there's a very long history in hydrology, and it's very interesting how it influenced our National Water Act today. But basically, the short of it is they planted trees in these catchments and these beautiful grasslands, and very quickly realized that they dried up the low flows. So during the winter months, they reduced the flow considerably. In the 1983, the forestry burnt out in some of the catchments, and that left behind a very degraded grassland catchments. And today, they are still heavily degraded. Large erosion up here, and these catchments are Bracken now. So with SAON, Our mandate is long-term monitoring to understand change. So when we came to the Cathedral Peak catchments in 2012, the first thing was to set up some basic climatological monitoring and look how the climate had changed since the initial monitoring in the 1940s. So what I've got here is an anomaly graph. So that line there is the mean, the historical mean for 1951 to 1980. If it's blue, it's colder than the mean. If it's red, it's warmer than the mean. Since we've been monitoring from the end of 2012, all the years have been warmer than the mean and quite considerably warmer than the mean. Yeah, about 1 degree warmer is what we've been saying. Looking at monthly, the same sort of trend, and we've looked at the heat waves as well, according to the source definition, and we are picking up far more heat waves that are occurring. Rainfall, not as clear a trend. We've seen very dry periods. We've seen the driest period on record, the droughts in the 2017-2018 period. But we've also seen wetter periods. So that we track the rainfall every month. So this is, we work in hydrological years, so everything starts in October in our labs. And this is over time, so this is where we're sitting at the moment, one of the wetter years since we've been monitoring. What we've been able to do is, okay, so that's the climate. We know it's hotter, rainfall's a little bit different, it's all over the place. What we looked at then was the stream flow. And so how we do it is we take the rainfall and we measure the stream flow at the outlets of the catchment and look at what percentage of that rainfall is converted to runoff. Collins and Everston in the past did a study published in 2001 where he showed over an 11-year period, about 43% of the rainfall was converted to runoff. Our current 11-year period, 58% of the rainfall is being converted to runoff. So there's less storage in the catchment. The reason for this is related to how that hydrological cycle has changed over time. The nature of the rainfall has changed, the distribution and the pattern in terms of intensity and the number of rain days, as well as the temperature changes that have occurred over time. So what else is influencing these catchments? We know now that climate, we're already picking up a signal. These catchments, as you all know, they need to be burned. That is not viewed favorably from Europe, and as Heidi spoke this morning, about the pressure to plant trees. And there's an increasing pressure that is coming to put trees in these beautiful grasslands. And there's also pressure from the changing climate and how the different land covers are moving. Cathedral Peak, again, came to the party here and said, well, we had the opportunity there to look at the degradation catchment and the woodies. So in catchment 6 here, it's a pristine grassland. So beautiful, what you all know. Then catchment 9, sorry, this one over here, has been a fire exclusion catchment, and over time it's transitioned towards leucocidia. Catchment 3 was planted with trees that burned out. It's heavily degraded, but it's also got widespread Bracken Fern invasion. So now we've got 3 paired catchments where we can start to unpack what is going on there. And then we get these lovely toys. So we love toys. The more we can monitor and the more we can collect data, the better. At each catchment, we put in a replicate of equipment. So we measure ET, or total evaporation, with an eddy covariance system or a surface renewal system. We've got our climate systems. We measure soil water contents. Hiding behind the selfie over there is an infiltration system. Infiltrometer, double ring infiltration, and then we've got our stream flow gauges at the outlets of the catchment, which give us an integrated picture of how that whole system is performing. So what is the basic hydro in 101? Whatever comes in is either the rainfall coming in, you get interception at the canopy level, then you get infiltration. That is either contributes into your soil water or into your stream flow, and then you get your evapotranspiration back. You change the land cover, you change how all those components function. You change the division considerably. Just to sort of note, the climate across the three catchments is very similar. It's not statistically significantly different. So we're confident in what we are comparing there. So the first point in rainfall is interception. So if you change the land cover there, the first thing we need to look at is how that interception changes. Looking at interception in grassland is a whole different ballgame, but it's quite easy under trees. And when we looked at it under Leucocidia, we measured about 29% of rainfall is intercepted by those Leucocidia species, which means it's being lost before it's even contributed to the hydrological cycle. The next thing was evapotranspiration. So the black line here is the grassland, the gray line is the the black line is the Leucocidia and the gray line is the grassland. These periods here are the winter months, these are the summers. So you can see during summer, the grassland and the Leucocidia are very similar. When we get into the winter period, the grassland switches off and the Leucocidia continues to transpire because it's evergreen. Looking at an accumulated way, here is your Leucocidia, here's your grassland. You can see that switch off happening and you just about get a leveling off the grass. This is sitting at about 700 mils per annum. This is over 1,000, nearing on 1,200 millimeters of ET per year. When you're getting a rainfall of about 1,400, that's quite considerable. Okay, so it's having a substantial impact, and it's having an impact when those catchments are most crucial to water supply. It's during the winter months that we rely on these catchments to meet our water demands. So Alistair's just going to talk about the Bracken, and then we'll carry on with some of the other stuff.
Thanks, Michele. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm from UKZN, agrometeorology, and I've come through hydrology in the past. And Michele says she convinced me, and she can be very convincing. I'm not really sure I had a choice, to be honest. But I do appreciate her including me in all her work. This is a quick interlude that's going to focus on a Bracken fern, okay, Pteridium. And Errol spoke on it earlier, and I just thought it's so nice to hear someone speaking on it from their perspective. My perspective has been the evapotranspiration and the difference between the grassland and the Bracken fern. And my hope is that after these slides, Errol can maybe feel a bit encouraged that there's purpose and have more energy to do the work that you're doing. I don't know whether you've thought hard about whether the Bracken affects the water balance or not, but we should collaborate. And it's these kind of conferences that bring us together. So I've just got to get the hang of this pointer and things like that, right? So in evaporation studies, we are particularly looking at 3 different canopy types that exist in the Cathedral Peak catchment. So we've got the grasses, which you see over here, and they are typically about 30 or 40 centimeters high. They've got roots. Can I say roots when I talk about grass? Okay, good. Okay, but they've got roots that are quite close to the plant base and quite close to the surface. And then I've got the Bracken there in the middle, which is a little bit taller. We had plant heights of about 60 centimeters, I would say. And I was going to say roots, okay, but I listened to Errol's talk, okay, and now I know I need to say rhizomes, okay. So they've got these rhizomes, and they're mainly in the surface, but they're spread out, okay. They're not just at the base of the plant, and you know, those things are interesting to us in hydrology because they determine what water the plant has access to. So these Bracken are getting water from a further distance away. that, they can access water in the soil. And then the Leucocidia plant here, thanks to Michele for that diagram. My tree diagram was terrible. This is Leucocidia, okay, Ohot. So the Bracken Fern has invaded into the degraded catchment 3. The Leucocidia has invaded into catchment 9. And the Leucocidia obviously has these deeper roots. Okay, so they go a bit further from the base of the plant, but they also go deeper. So they, in general, have a larger volume of soil that can provide them with water. Okay, and in winter, we know the surface dries out quickly, and we think, these plants have got deeper roots. Okay, there's a hydrology impact. So this all links to the water balance, and I have tried to get the magnitude of the components of the water balance sort of about the right size according to the arrows there. And the two largest components of the water balance are typically rainfall and evapotranspiration. Okay, and we don't have, we've got lots of rainfall measurements, or fair number of rainfall measurements, but evapotranspiration is rare. Okay, historically, we did a water balance, and whatever was left over, we said is evapotranspiration. Okay, it wasn't a great way of doing things. So we have measurement techniques that we now use to measure evapotranspiration, and rainfalls, you lose some to interception in a canopy, and there are lots of studies that can be done with these different canopies. We don't know how the interception varies. You can see the canopy structures are different, the plant height is different. And then what is left over infiltrates. And then that's available for either evapotranspiration or stream flow. Okay, so that's the way we are looking at it. And it's just interesting to try and share that with you. Did I cover everything? Okay. Right. Lovely pictures. Okay, so this was, I think Byron took these, Byron Gray. And when you see a student's name and you see Gray, I thought, flip, imagine if this guy's dad is Alan. Hey? Money. Hey? But he's not closely related to Alan, so I've stopped calling Alan. Anyway, Byron took these pictures from the same place at different times of the year. Okay, and I just love the way they show what the Bracken is doing. So the top left is December, and there's some equipment there in the middle. And I must congratulate the Grassland scientists on the way they do their equipment. When they budget for the year, it's quite clear to me from watching the presentations. You say, right, the budget for the year requires a tape measure and a square thing. Okay, and we'll go to the field every 6 months, and then we'll count stuff inside the square. Okay, we measure 10 times a second, okay, with that eddy covariance system. And then we upscale that, we get all those measurements, and we get daily and weekly and monthly and annual. And it's very expensive stuff. What's fantastic about the data that we're going to show is that it's actually measured at a high frequency, and we have it for quite a long period of time. We have it for 4 or 5 years. Okay, so that's quite rare. And also, where we're comparing the different types of vegetation, we are comparing them within a close proximity. They're within neighboring catchments. Okay, so it's really quite unique in the world. December, top left, top right was in about March, bottom left, and you can see in the top right, there, there's some leaves, no, sorry, not leaves. What must I say? Fronds, thank you. They're fronds starting to die and go into senescence. Bottom left, that's in June, and they all, the surface vegetation is is DED. It's dead. Okay. And you would call that senescence. Okay. Roots are still alive. And then in the bottom right is August. So you can see that the plants have actually collapsed. Okay, the canopy's collapsed, they've fallen over, it's starting to break up. Okay, probably rain, maybe some snow, is helping. Okay, and one of the measurements that we have between catchments 3, which is the Bracken, catchment 6, which is the pristine grassland, and catchment 9 is albedo. Okay, and measurements of albedo are quite rare. It's something remote sensing doesn't give us. We measure it with an upward-facing sensor. We get solar radiance, shortwave mainly, solar radiance, and a downward-facing sensor that measures the reflectance of that solar radiance. So it's a ratio. And you can see that the highest albedo is the grassland of about 0.2. So that means about 0.2 of the incoming radiation is reflected. Okay, and what I find lovely is that there's an increase during the dry season. The albedo increases. So that means the reflectance is increasing. The gray dots is the Bracken. Okay, so that's slightly lower albedo. And then the lowest albedo at about 0.1, not fluctuating too much, is the leucocidia or the ohite. So this is interesting, and there was a fire, obviously, that sort of switches the relationship in August 2022. Things happen there with fires. Obviously, the vegetation burns, and you've got a black surface with no vegetation. So the albedo of the grassland changes. But this measurement of albedo tells us so much, and it's of such value because it tells us that the radiation balance at these sites is different. It tells us that the energy balance at these sites is different. Now, if the energy balance and the radiation balance are different, it means that evapotranspiration is probably different. If the radiation balance changes somewhere, it means that it's probably got a different temperature. A change in the radiation balance is what's driving climate change. Okay, and the classic example that people use in climate change of a positive feedback, which this could be as well, is that the climate's warming up, so the snow melts, exposing a surface which now has a higher albedo, which means more absorbance of energy, which means heating up the atmosphere more. So that's a positive reinforcement. Okay, and that's kind of what we're seeing here as well as the vegetation transitions. I need to hurry up. Okay, sorry. I'm a lecture, so I'm normally trying to fill time, Okay, I think this is my last slide. She's never had to do this before. Depends so heavily on me. Okay, so last slide. So this is the crux, the ET comparison. Okay, ET, evapotranspiration. And I've shown it at a monthly level here. Okay, lovely seasonal pattern. Okay, absolutely love it. It's doing exactly what we expect. Summer, it's high. In winter, it's low. In fact, those low winter values are probably soil evaporation. So the vegetation's DED and on the surface, and it's just soil evaporation. If I add in the catchment 9, leucocidia, you can see, as Michele showed in her previous slide, that the dry season water use is much higher. Okay, and I would have guessed that in a way, but we had to have measurements of it. Okay, it's evergreen. So it's growing throughout winter. And if there's any moisture there, it's going to use it. Okay, it's also, it possibly has a higher leaf area index. Okay, it's a different shaped plant. Now, what is going to be the result of the bracken? Because that dies off in winter. Okay, that goes into senescence. What is going to be the water use of the bracken? So I'm going to add that to the slide in gray. It's really interesting to see that in the wet season, it's as high as the Leucocidia. Okay, and the PhD student, he did his work in 2019 towards the middle of 2020, and he stopped. And he said that, you know, the bracken has a higher water use than the grassland in the dry season, and you know, similar water use to the Leucocidia in the dry season. Okay, that's what he could say. But having carried on with the measurements, and Sayon, well done for carrying on with the measurements, because it takes money, and Alan Gray wasn't there to help. In the following years, in particular, it's interesting to see September 2021, September 2022, or August 2022. What we've noticed is that not only is the water use higher than the grassland in winter, it also gets, it also increases more quickly than the grassland in winter. So it probably starts growing more quickly than the grassland in winter, which makes sense. It's an invader. So, you know, it responds more quickly at the start of the season. I'm going to stop now.
Okay, so we're going to finish the story quickly before Andrew chases us off. So basically, when you look at the stream flow out of the Leucocidia, it's reducing, it's only converting about 20-25% of the rainfall to runoff. So a huge, bigger portion is being lost to ET. We also know Lindo Dlamini did a study in this catchment, and he presented, I think, at the last one, and showed that there's more soil carbon under the grassland than under the Leucocidia. We know more soil carbon, more soil water retention. So the sort of ending off plea is, to link back to our topic, is that if we want to conserve these water towers, we need to work together. There's got to be a look at biodiversity, water, and carbon. We cannot work in isolation. I think it's just echoing what Tim said at the start of a systematic approach. So thank you.
Thank you, Michele. We are running a little bit over time, but we want to have some time at the end for questions on all of the presentations. So if you do have a question, please hold that. Kirsten Oliver from Wildlands to come and tell us about her Rangeland project. Thank you, Kirsten.
Thanks. Okay, there should be a presentation. Am I supposed to do something? Have you guys got my presentation? Thanks. Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me, also a catchment specialist rather than a grassland specialist. So very happy to be here and contribute to this forum. I was here once a very long time ago. I'm going to just very briefly tell you about what we're doing in the Upper Tugela in the Drakensberg with regards to the development of a water fund for the Upper Tugela catchment. So essentially, I'm just going to go through the context of it. What is the challenge? What is the proposed solution? How we're going to roll it out, and how we're justifying the rolling out of a water fund in the catchment, and how we have already transformed that into a business case to take action. So just to give you some context, this is where we're working. How does the laser work? Like that. So this is Royal Natal. For those of you who know the Drakensberg, this is Royal Natal. And on the southern side, this is Cathedral Peak, where all the studies of the previous presentation were focused. We are working basically in between in these two community areas, And then just north of that, this is a brand new nature reserve that's been declared by all the private landowners in that area. What we just, I'll talk about it, but just to give you context on the map, this very yellow outlined area is what we're proposing as a new nature reserve that is community owned. It's a very big nature reserve, and it's right up in the upper reaches of the Drakensberg, bordering on Lesotho. This is the border with Lesotho. Okay, so the importance of the Upper Tugela, or the relevance of the Upper Tugela. So this is a priority strategic water source area. It's obviously a key natural resource. There's very pristine grasslands in the area. It provides ecosystem services to the grasslands and also to the people and livestock in the area. At the other end of the Tugela River is the marine protected area that's also been recently established. And then there are the social considerations of the Amazizi and the Amangwan communities that we're working with. I'm just shooting through these quickly. What are the threats to water security in this area? First of all, invasive alien plant spread. We're looking specifically at woody species, so that's black wattle, acacia, and eucalyptus. Poor land management. So there's a lot of people living in this area doing rangeland management. So we're trying to address that. Erosion, historically, because it's a very high rainfall area, there's quite a lot of erosion of the grasslands. And then obviously water quality is our main focus. So through this project, we are working on Wildlands Wild Trust that I work for has been present in the catchment for upwards of 10 years. And we have been working with the communities doing invasive alien plant clearing, working with those same communities doing rangeland management, and now trying to establish a protected area within the catchment. With that as a backing, we working with the Nature Conservancy to do some feasibility. So what we're trying to do is to work on those nature-based solutions, and this is just a little bit more of each of those 3 nature-based solutions that we're implementing. So using funding from various different NGOs and corporate partners, we've had funding to do this. We're using the Working for Water compartments that were developed during the natural resource management phase, which unfortunately has come to an end. Hopefully will come back at some point. Some of the highlights of this implementation is that as we've moved away from the more government-funded option, we've realized that we have much bigger impact. So corporate funding, so presenting a business case to those with deeper purses actually has a significant impact on our ability to implement at scale. And you can see there's various different things that we've managed to increase, things like chainsaw training and herbicide application training we've been able to bring in more readily. So with rangeland management, we're working with the organization Meet Naturally in the Herding for Health program to implement at scale working with the community, contracting with the farmers directly so that they take responsibility for the rangeland management. I'm sure those of you in this community will understand quite well how the Herding for Health program works with these various levels of rotational grazing. So the first level, which is what we're implementing at the moment, is a rotational rest rather than active grazing. The second level, which we would only move to in a few years' time, is then rotating which of those compartments are grazed. And finally, at the end, you rotate the compartments within the compartments for a more established rotational grazing. And then the third nature-based solution that we're implementing is this establishment of a community nature reserve, and I indicated the extent of that. The communities we've been working with for the last also upwards of 10 years in trying to get this conservation area established. There are lots of pitfalls with working with communities and trying to get nature reserves established. It's a much more complicated process than simply working with a private landowner, but the communities are very, very receptive. They're pushing it. They keep inviting us to have meetings and work through the process. So yeah, protecting that area is crucial and making sure that further development doesn't happen. That's our opinion. But I think, you know, with the advent of increased tourism, increased footpaths in that area, it needs to be looked after more strictly. So just very quickly, the Apatogela Water Fund process. So taking through the feasibility assessment that we've done. So we initially identified the nature-based solutions. We, just a caveat, we know that one of the solutions that we're not implementing is donga rehabilitation. I did mention it, but we're not actually implementing it, and we haven't done massive erosion assessments to see what there is. And that's something that we'd like to address in another phase. But unfortunately, in this business case, we couldn't address everything. So hopefully that will come through. The feasibility then involved the actual biophysical modeling. We did this in partnership with Nature for Water, or Pegasus, who are based here in Hilton. They did a variety of different scenarios of implementation, from no implementation to the current status quo to full implementation at scale over a 30-year time period. Then there was an economic analysis done of the various different costs of nature-based solutions, then valuing the benefits of nature-based solutions, building a discounted timeline, and finally evaluating the net benefit. So finally, the justification. So why is it important to invest in nature using nature-based solutions at scale, implementing in this catchment? These are the results of the feasibility assessment. You can see them all there. I'm not going to go through them just from a time point of view. But basically, at the end of the day, the benefit cost ratio that came out of this was a 2.3 to 1. So for every R1 that is spent on the implementation, there is a benefit return of 2.3. So there is definitely a benefit to this project. In addition to the scientific outcomes and the study that we did, there are also the social and environmental benefits of an Apatogela Water Fund, which include improved livelihoods through the creation of jobs, and also the environmental co-benefits. So those are the ones that obviously us in the environmental field are most interested in, but you have to consider the livelihoods as well. So costs, just also a summary, the value of the invasive alien plant clearing over a 30-year time period, 56 million, protected area establishment, approximately 18 million, rangeland management, 52 million, monitoring and evaluation, 13 million, and admin and overheads, approximately 25 million. These are all approximate values and would need to be recalculated as over time. Benefits include avoided loss of yield, 226 million, avoided capital replacement, 30 million, livelihood improvement through grazing, best management practice, 54 million, avoided treatment costs at water treatment plants, 8 million, and carbon sequestration, 62 million. Thanks, Sue. All right, so let's cut off on that. Yeah, so the biggest part of any large-scale implementation of this kind is the collective nature of it. So working with other organizations, and again, we presented in a similar format at the Mountain Conference earlier, and this presentation from Seon just before mine really has impact because we're working together. And you can see from the results of all the research that's being done, taking that research and putting it into a case where we can actually give back and actually make an active difference is really important. So working with all of the other organizations in the area to prioritize the different interventions and set up a very effective governance structure, which we're in the process of doing, and also obviously finding sustainable financing. And that makes up the Apatogela Water Fund. And on the right-hand side of your screen, you can again see the benefits. How are we going to do this? So a repeat of nature-based, the 3 different nature-based solutions, just a reminder. So invasive alien plant clearing, rangeland management, and the establishment of a protected area. And how are we going to do that? Through effective governance, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, and then designing an actual fund. And you can get more information on that. We're about to launch the business case. This is the front cover of the business case document, and we're about to launch that in September. So if anyone wants some more information, you can let me know after this. Thanks.
Thank you, Kirsten. Fantastic work there. Hold those questions. We're going to put those at the end. And then if I could ask Mark Graham to come up now, you're going to have to really think sort of out of the box here, because Mark's going to talk to us about what happens to a large degree, what happens down at the river. Yeah, and a whole lot of really cool stuff, which you're going to say, if you hadn't heard the previous two talks, you'd say it's got nothing to do with grasslands. But I think we've joined the dots for you. Mark, thank you.
Okay, lovely to be here, and thank you for the invitation, Kevin, for reaching out. I actually started my life in this space as a grassland scientist of all things, and I've slowly moved up the catchment into the wet domain. So it's fantastic to be here and hearing some of what you guys are talking about, and some of this, all the old stuff that I remember 30, nearly 40 years ago when Kevin was still a junior. No, we were probably peers at that stage, but some of the same things are being spoken about again. So it's fantastic and interesting that we haven't quite resolved some of those. But what was really nice is this potential to kind of cross-link and integrate some of the thinking that's gone on and the cross-links into the water space. So this is a kind of practical session, I think, in a way. And what I want to give you is some of the sense of what we've been developing as tools in the water space, which is synthesizing and bringing some of the stuff that you've been talking about all day into the space. And I'm reminded of hearing Alistair speaking, and I was just watching his lips so carefully because he was talking about albedo. And a colleague of mine was talking the other day about this as well, and I don't know where it came from, but he was talking about his libido, and I'm sure he was, and I was very confused what conversation we were having, but Alistair spoke with such clarity. It was wonderful, and care that he gave to that talk. So thanks, Al, for keeping it tidy. Okay, so we're going to have a bit of a background, some of the tools that we've been using here, and but the beast you see in the water there is there's a drone up there, and we're pulling this thing across the water here, and this is this little gizmo thing here that we were going to do it in the pool, but we thought we'd do it here. I can drag it across the pool if you like, but we need a swimmer for that. Okay, so really what we're seeing is for effective management, we obviously need, for terrestrial ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems, there's an urgent need there for data, and how does this integrate with some of the technologies that's out there. So I'm just going to run you through some of the work we're doing, and it might have relevance and application integration with your guys' work as well. Many of you know with drones, and seeing Debbie in the back there, she would know a lot about this, but for this drone work, there's a requirement for licensed pilots. There's a whole lot of technical stuff there. We won't spend much time on that, but I think the important thing is really what I want to highlight is that now we're able to carry multiple payloads on these drones, which can give us quite a lot of useful data, certainly in the aquatic environment, and I'll demonstrate some of that, but I think it has broad applications into the terrestrial environment as well. And often it's that terrestrial environment which is driving the aquatic side of things that we're interested in, and Sue's interested in to some degree, that is at that interface, when it's lovely to be here for that. So it's this ability to integrate LiDAR scanners, multispectral sensors, obviously the red, green, blue kind of classical thing, but ground penetrating radar and echo sounders into that. And I'll show you how we do some of that cool stuff. Common applications there, water monitoring into catchments, grassland, grass cover, above ground cover, biomass, burns, and so on, and being able to digitally capture that quite quickly and readily. And then how we take that into various surveying techniques, precision agriculture, riparian vegetation health, particularly along the edges of the rivers, bathymetric surveys, and so on, and hydrological data collection, Michele's work, and many other applications. This is just one illustration of it. The ability to pick up ponding areas from the LiDAR surveys and identify where we're going to get this ponding recharge areas for our catchments, where do those sit, and where do we getting our flow paths at a micro scale, which often we look at a map of a country and where the rivers flow, but actually what's driving it, where the water comes from is important, and how is that moving through a landscape, where is it emerging, where are the breakpoints, how do we control those, where's that energy flow, and what are the hydraulics associated with that as well. So flood mapping, management, land optimization, that sort of thing. This is a project up in northern Mozambique. We've heard about the flooding in there, and we can see where those flood effects are likely to take place, where the flood out zones, the avulsion here, the river pops its banks and gets out into these areas where those risks sit on a landscape. Where this is a project up in Tanzania, big sugar estate over here, and this river really wants to move across here, and it often jumps the banks and into the sugarcane fields here. Sugarcane farmers get agitated. They're losing their sugarcane. The sweetness goes out of life. And so they're saying, how do we deal with that? And this is we can see where the old channel actually wants to go, and it's been kept in here. But if we let it flood out over here, we could do something useful on that kind of a landscape. The ability to use multispectral imagery and understand the health of systems, I think it's been touched on in numerous places, but different indices that are out there now that can be used, and taking multispectral imagery and data beyond the red, green, blue kind of focus that we typically have into the infrared and the ultraviolet side of the spectrum, and taking some of those things that we can't see with our eyes, but the sensors can, and post-processing that data with an ability to see what is the state of the health and condition of these systems is certainly helpful. This is on a project, vegetation recovery, and we can start seeing some of the stress areas in response to some of the impacts on those systems. That's a little boat here, and I'll talk about it just now, but just a close-up of that is that it's got multiple sensors on it, and we can tow this across a river system and start picking up some really subtle details, which otherwise we would often not even be aware of. There's a turbidity meter in there, turbidity being driven often by the land use practices around the catchments, and the land use along and the condition of the riparian zones is affecting the turbidity, and I'll illustrate that at a scale which is quite useful. Flow meters here, total dissolved salts, salts there, and temperature probes looking at temperature fluctuation in response to climate change. It was fascinating, Michele's talk earlier on just the extent to which we're now in these peak and hot, much hotter periods, and being so temperature driving aquatic ecosystems in a big way as well. So we can measure that, and we can do a sonar sense, so we can get a three-dimensional cross section. This is the Lions River here. And what's interesting here, we've flown that with the LiDAR, and we've stitched that together, and I'll show you how just now with the bathymetric survey, so we can now get a three-dimensional model even below the water surface and see what's happening under the water. And what's useful there is we can run hydrological models through that to have a digital terrain model, basically, of the whole system, including below the water surface. We were chatting, Rory and I, just at coffee earlier, just how the Tugela system, he's telling me how that's changed. He's a young chap that used to swim with all the other mfans in the river there as a lighty in the Tugela, and how that was, and it was much cleaner, less sand. How are these systems changing? Cool, so we can talk about sediments. There's the boat there, and we're launching it. There's the river there. You can see that bridge is over there, and that's that same bridge over there, and we've surveyed this section here. So typically, the old style was you had a boat and you had to be able to get across there. You had cables, and it was a nightmare to get across big river systems. Crocodiles, hippos wading through there, beating crocodiles off with your stick and trying to get across there. It made life interesting. The other problem was that typically we would have a single cross section slice through the river to tell us something what's going on. And that was very limited, and you could only know about what's happening there, but what about this other area, and how does that change under different flow conditions, response to catchment drivers? With this UAV and the sonar and melding those two data sets, we now get this is the Olifants River, and through the Kruger, we can get a very detailed picture of the entire system, which is super useful from a biological perspective. The old kind of survey technique is also quite crude, and we lost a lot of this textural detail. And often it's in that textual detail we're hearing from Alistair, what's happening at the rhizomes. Is that the right word? Yeah. What's happening at the rhizome level, and that's the stuff where the action is actually taking place. So if we don't know what that's happening and we're taking a crude picture, we lose some of that detail. So that's really important to get that picture. Where are we? Cross section, okay, there we go. And this really just illustrates the hydrological model, and we can start, if we've got a nice detailed hydraulics terrain model, we can then start saying, well, let's put a big rainfall event of 100 mils per whatever day through there, and where does it flow? Where does it inundate? What systems are getting recharged, and so on? And you can start playing with this kind of simulation to understand where water's moving across these landscapes. The other really useful thing is from a fish habitat availability point of view, we're interested in the fish. Where do they go? How do they respond? And how does that habitat availability to them change under different flow conditions in the system? So this is basically a percentage available, habitat available under different flow conditions, and how the depth of flow, which is a function of how much water is running through that system, the depth of flow, how the habitats change from slow, very slow, shallow, very slow habitat over here, to fast, deep habitat over here. And you can see the sort of pattern of available habitats changing as the depth of flow increases typically in a river. How is that affected by, and what does that mean for you guys? Well, it's the terrestrial drivers and the condition of those catchments which allow that response in the river systems, which we're interested in. A sort of simulation of that. You can see this habitat changing here. This is the Olifants. Remember, we had a single cross section through here. I don't know if this is going to run. Doesn't matter if it doesn't, but it just shows that we can, there we go. We can see how the habitats change and what becomes available under different flow conditions as a flood would come through there. Understanding what's happening in the catchment and what's driving our flows is important for the riverine ecology to understand what becomes available in response to what the grasslands and rangelands are delivering into these systems. This is just to the turbidity story for a moment. We can map, so that's that river there you saw earlier with the drone. There's the vehicle there. The drone's flown this whole system here, and we've collected a bunch of information, put it into the GIS, and we can map at a very interesting spatial scale and see what's happening. The interesting site here is that on this field over here is a local farmer doing his business, some crops or I think pastures going on here that he's got growing. But underneath the road is a little culvert, and that culvert comes in and there's a drain that enters the river here. What's fascinating at this textual detail is us being able to see how it is that the total dissolved solids coming off this field are popping. We're getting increased salts coming out from the runoff from this field. Additionally, we can see the turbidity increasing over here. As it's coming out, we're getting an increased turbidity signal, more suspended solids, wash off coming off that piece of land, and we can start mapping it at quite a fine detail and seeing where these issues are. The really interesting one for me on this picture was this site here. Initially, you thought, what the hell is going on here? And this was a wattle snag that it actually was jammed into the side of the river, and the water was coming along, and we're getting these eddy effects, and it was actually scouring the bank away, generating this turbidity. This sediments were being enhanced by this old wattle log that it was jammed up against the banks here. And we can start picturing this picture of what's happening. Let me not go too much. The classic format of surveying these rivers and how we put a tape across the river and we get a single one-dimensional picture. but now we're able to do this in much finer detail. There's a cross-section stitched to a LiDAR survey, the subsurface survey. But this maybe is a picture worth noting, and this is the ability now with our cross-sections. We're thinking about where's the water going, how much is being generated under different conditions. And this is a really simple citizen science tool, which I think you've used a bit and others have been using now to actually measure flow and velocity in the system. Velocity being a surrogate for how much water is moving in through, how quickly it's going. If we have a cross-section, we can quickly measure the total discharge. We don't have to have a fancy gauging station or gauging weir, that with a simple cross-sectional profile through a river, measuring at critical spaces, we get a little hydraulic jump. The faster the water's flowing, the more the water jumps on the front face of this ruler, and that we can translate into velocity, how quickly the water is moving, and we can get a total discharge through that slice of water, which now we're starting to engage with farmers and saying, well, what's happening here? What's happening there? Who's taking the water? Where the water's going? How does the water change under different catchment and land use management scenarios? There's a relationship between flow and depth and discharge, which we can do. And increasingly now we're also utilizing this kind of technology to be able to take a video of a river like this, and it's called particle image velocimetry, where we can actually measure the particles going across the surface and translate that into the velocity and the discharge. So it's simple techniques here of measuring discharge using some simple tools as well. That's a cross-section through that river system. So by way of conclusions, I don't know what, is that the time? 5 more minutes? Don't worry about that. Okay. Sure. We're nearly done. Okay. Yeah, just that there's these techniques out there. I think we talk about integration with catchments, land use, grassland practices, and we've had a fantastic session led, and it's nice to talk at the end here about how do we manage those catchments, what's happening, looking at the changes in catchments and being able to measure that response at a kind of granular level and how those things are changing in time. So I think, and importantly to getting, if you ever hear me talk, I'll mention this word, communities and citizen science. How do we get communities, farmers involved in the science and being able to measure this and not restricted to some academics sitting in this room, but how do we expand and get that science message out there through this lot? And then we can do that. I think that's it. Chat to me if you'd like. We're at Ground Truth just down the road here, but I think you did want some
Mark, thank you very much.
Leading questions.
I think you get that slide back up again, if you don't mind, that last one. I just borrowed Mark's slide presentation to put that up to hopefully foster a little bit of discussion, along with any questions that you might have for the speakers. So for those of you at the back and whose eyes are like mine, I'll read some of those to you. This is about developing that community of practice and saying grassland management influence on catchment functioning. Is there a case for an active community of practice? I'll skip one and read the next. To what extent can a catchment's water quality and quantity be influenced by grassland management interventions? Is there a case for investment by catchment managers? And would it be realistic to envisage measurable catchment performance improvements attributable to grassland management? So I don't know if there's anyone with comments or questions for our speakers from the floor. Rory, here's a mic.
I just didn't get what tether is between both.
Yeah,
Sorry, the question was what's the reason for the tether between the boat and the drone?
The reason.
Or what's the
So
need for the drone?
you can with the drone you can drag it across the system, and you can basically build up a subsurface.
So the drone pulls the boat.
Yeah, and you can drive it where you want it to go in the river. Our rivers here tend to do this, particularly the Tigela.
Yes, we've got a question here. I think there's a roving mic just behind you. Oh, Sue, you've already got a mic. Carry on. Yeah.
So I'm thinking when you talk about community of practice and citizen scientists and things, I'm thinking specifically farmers, and from the perspective of my involvement with Andrew in the Quandavuka Catchment Sensitive Farming Project, and how hard it is to get farmers to, first of all, read information that you've now collected from research, and you're trying to extract key insights, you're making it shorter, you're doing whatever you can, but at the end of the day, the farmer has to be interested to engage with the material and to act. So what struck me maybe about those water quality maps, or some of the applications of the drone technology that you're talking about, have you tested any farmer appetite on which of those things grabs them? Because often a picture or a map or something really interesting would be like, oh my word, that's mind blowing. I need to understand this. So is this what's happening on my farm? Why is it red? You know what I mean? So just something.
Yeah, so I think you talk about farmers' appetite. The biggest appetite farmers have is for water. And when the water starts running less, and there's less, and you've got farmer downstream compared to farmer upstream, and in between there's abstraction taking place, skillum pumps and whatever, or unlicensed kind of, plantations and whatever. I think that's where the rubber's going to hit the road. So I think the more that there's a engagement, understanding, for sure, at the catchment scale, that's where the action is going to be. But often it's impossible for farmers to know until we can make these tools accessible to them, and they can all go and go into the river with their velocity plank and measure that discharge themselves to know what's going on and say, but my mate upstream is taking all the water. Not all of it, but it should be. And this is where the environmental flows, resource quality objectives from a water perspective start coming into play. Is that in summer, in the middle of summer, in this stream here, you should be able to put your measurement stick in there, and there should be typically a velocity of 2 meters a second in the middle. If there's not, then it's been surveyed. If it's not, there's a problem. Where's the problem? Start scouting around. And that's where the RQOs start meshing in with catchment management and what's happening. But yeah, for sure. And the better we communicate, like anything, the better we can get the message across with pictures and maps.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. There was another question at the front here.
Well, it's actually a question to my Grassland Society colleagues. I'd like to just get a show of hands for any of you who thought your work may have some relevance or connection to what's just been spoken about. And before you put your hand up, think if you've ever written in any of your work, the impact of or will inform management decisions. Show of hands. 1, 2. Does anybody do any work? Like, show them properly. 3, 4. Has anybody measured species diversity? Has anybody
5,
worked
6,
on alien plants?
7, 8.
Okay. Has anybody worked on bare ground? Has anybody worked on carbon? It's all interconnected. And if we really want our science to have impact, what these guys do, what I notice, because I work across all of these, is specialists love to focus on the detail of their work, and it can terrify the living daylights out of you. The importance is connecting the dots between it. So what is important in your field that speaks to this field? You don't need to know the details. You just need to know there's a connection between rooting biodiversity, soil carbon, hydrology, and so on and so forth. So I think I'm just making the case that if, look hard, because your work is in there. And I think when we do this integrative sort of work, and I think this is where the community of practice comes in, the difficulty is in the scale between the different disciplines and the types of question asked. When I ask Michele, what do you need from me as a botanist? She wants leaf area index. I never measure leaf area index. So what is it the grassland community should be measuring? That can help inform this, because water is the integrator and it's what government's involved with. So I think there's a new era coming in the grassland science where we connect and speak to each other about what kinds of measurements we need across these disciplines. So I, for one, have in support of the top one.
Thank you. One right at the back there, if we may. I don't know if the roving mic can get to the lady at the back.
Thank you. I don't know if my English bundles are finished because it's after 4, but I shall try. There's an important body of work that is happening in the Umzimvubu catchment, which showcases the community of practice. Basically, people there that are working in the catchment have come together and formed that sort of what I call partnership. So it documents work that is happening in the catchment. So there is value in your point number 1. And additionally to that, South African National Biodiversity Institute has done a body of work as well. They have a project called the Living Catchment Project, which was done to support all the catchment-based initiatives. And every 2 years, they host the catchment-based endeavor where people that are working in the different catchments come and they showcase the work that they're doing. So, from the work that is happening in the Umzimvubu catchment, which I have been not involved, but sort of being an audience of and a fan of that work, there have been, a request for researchers to come work there, particularly in measuring the changes that has happened in the landscape after the clearing of the wattle, for example. And there's also some social interactive work that is happening in terms of spring protection. And I know Ground Truth has developed a spring assessment toolkit, which another project that was sponsored by the WRC tried or attempted to use in those springs that are happening in that catchment. So yeah, there is value.
Thank you for that. Yeah, great work done by Environmental Rural Solutions, Nikki McLeod, Sisi Matela, and the Umzimvubu Catchment Partnership. I think it's time to wrap it up.